AVC has it going right. Okay, I watched a couple of videos last night. One by James Griffiths, one by Richard McCook. I actually think it was Richard McCook who started the thread, but both of them talked about 5 of their favourite record producers. I think it's a good thread to get involved in, quite straightforward, and sort of gives me the opportunity to talk about a few of my favourite records. So, in no particular order, I just thought I'd mention these. So, first up, this is Willie Mitchell. Now, in the 1960s, Willie Mitchell was a band leader. He was a trumpet player. But around 1970, he became involved with High Records in Memphis. I think he actually became the label owner. But yeah, then throughout the 1970s, he made all these lovely soul records with the likes of Ann Peebles, Al Green, O.V. Wright. And all of these records have a very distinctive sound. You can tell straight away that it's a Willie Mitchell production. It's interesting because James Griffiths picked and talks in quite a bit of detail about George Martin. Now, George Martin, obviously one of the most important record producers in certainly in modern music, all the work that he did with the Beatles. But his role was very different. I mean, when I hear a Beatles record, I hear a Beatles record. I don't hear a George Martin record. And similarly with the records that he made after the Beatles split up throughout the 70s with the likes of Jeff Beck, UFO. I don't think he had a particularly distinctive sound. That wasn't his deal, you know. Throughout the 60s, it was him who was basically realising the Beatles' creative ideas. That's basically how he had an impact, and obviously he was the 5th Beatle. But Willie Mitchell was very different, you know. All of these records have a very similar distinctive sound, and I like that. And I think actually all of the producers that I've picked today have all got that going on. When I thought about just picking out 5 names, all of these sort of jumped into my head, and I think probably for that reason. Willie Mitchell, all of these songs have got a very laid back, lazy groove to them. Obviously they're all recorded in Memphis. You know, I always think of Memphis as being hot, you know, and almost the heat overpowering the musicians. That's the feeling that I get from these records. It almost feels that these records were recorded in 100-degree plus heat, and that's almost dictating the pace of the music. I don't know. That's how I've always thought about it in my head. But yeah, lovely stuff. I never get tired of hearing these records, and as I say, a really unique sound. So yeah, very cool. Right then, another producer who certainly had his own sound, and that was Norman Whitfield. Now you think about these records that he made with the Temptations in the late 60s and early 70s. I mean, Motown Records up until about 67, 68, he had a very safe pop soul sound, you know. It was very wholesome. But then around, I say, 67, 68, he starts making these records with the Temptations. So the likes of Cloud 9, Puzzle People, Sky's the Limit, Psychedelic Shack. All of these records, I say they've got a psychedelic soul feel going on. You know, it's a very futuristic soul. It really did pave the way for the likes of Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder to start making those records that they did in the early 70s, likes of What's Going On, Talking Book, Inner Visions. I'm not sure that without those records that Norman Whitfield made in the late 60s, that those artists could have got to that stage on the Motown label in the early 70s. I love these records. I mean, I played all of these albums actually yesterday morning, and they still sound absolutely fantastic. So yeah, Norman Whitfield. Then quite an obvious choice for me is Quincy Jones. This, everybody knows this is Thriller, of course, but the real deal for me is the one before that, Off the Wall. The thing about Quincy Jones was that he always surrounded himself with the best people, whether that be, you know, the players, the musicians, or whether that be songwriters, and that's exactly what he did with this record. I can't think of a better sounding record than this. Think about the production, the mix of the record, it just sounds wonderful. All of those 70s jazz funk records that he made in his own name throughout the 70s as well, they're always worth picking up. It's like a who's who of players from the day on there. Absolutely great stuff. But yeah, this for me is it's a spot on, perfect album, you know. So right then, number 4, I'm going to talk about Barry White. I mentioned Barry White a lot in my videos. I always say, you know, if ever you see his records about, pick them up. They're always cheap, but they're always, you know, they always sound fantastic. You know, big orchestrations, always funky, always worth picking up. You get them for a couple of quid each. But as well as the records that he made in his own name and with the Love Unlimited Orchestra throughout the 70s, he also produced some other artists. So including the likes of Tom Brock, West Wing, but in particular this album's by an artist called Gloria Scott. The album's called What Am I Gonna Do? It's on Casablanca from 1974. It's just a stunning record. There's a track on here called A Case of Too Much Love Making, which is one of my favourite modern soul records. Absolutely beautiful, great production, great vocal as well. But the whole album has that Barry White hallmark sound to it, you know. Again, another producer, you know his sound straight away as soon as you hear it. Wonderful stuff. Perhaps a little bit underrated actually, Barry White. You know, the fact that his records are so cheap, they're everywhere, they seem to be overlooked. I mean, always pick them up when you see them. Right then, last one, number 5, something you perhaps wouldn't expect me to talk about, but this is Def Leppard's Hysteria album from 1987. It's produced by Robert John Mutt Lange. Yeah, so you think about those records that Def Leppard made in the late 70s, early 80s, they were just a standard British rock band. And then they made this album with Mutt Lange, 1983. This is Pyromania. This was a massive selling record. But straight away, it totally transformed the band's sound. They didn't sound like a little British rock band anymore. They sounded huge. I remember hearing the first single in the UK off this album. It wasn't the first single in the States. The first single in the UK off this album was Animal. I remember hearing a little crappy transistor radio as a 12-year-old kid, and just remember thinking it just sounded wonderful. You know, you read a lot in the music press and interviews with producers or artists, you know, saying that they try and make music to sound good on the radio. Well, that's exactly what he did with this record. I think this sounds, I mean, it's a dated sound now. It's you know, it's very 80s. It's very overblown, very bombastic. But yeah, I mean, it sold a shed load of records. Interestingly, you know, there's a famous story, isn't it? It took 4 years to make. They had to sell something like 8 million copies just to break even the amount of money they spent on making it. Obviously, it sold 3 times out of whatever it did. But yeah, it's a fascinating story. It's a fascinating album. It's something I still play quite a lot. It's interesting actually. I was saying this to somebody the other day about the VC. You know, I've been making videos for about 5 years, so. You know, during that time, I've tended to show records that I've been buying now, that I've been listening to now. So it's almost like a sanitized version of my record collection. You know, lockdown has almost forced me to see my record collection for what it really is. And you know, there's big parts of my record collection that, you know, it's got shit like this in it. You know, so, and I still love these records. I still see these bands. You know, it's growing up as a teenager. A lot of my friends are into the same music. So, you know. When we get together now, this is what we listen to, and these are the bands that we still go and see now. It's just an excuse to get together. But nobody, incidentally, none of my friends like the music I listen to now and I buy now. Nobody likes soul music. I'm stuck on my own here. But yeah, so anyway, yeah, Robert John Mutt Lange. Obviously, you know, the other records he made with likes of Bryan Adams and Shania Twain, I can do without, whatever. But this album in particular, I love. And again, a producer with his own sound. So cheers.